Let me now start with you on the LI, the Traffic LI, which has now been withdrawn based on the fallout, public fallout. And of interest is the fact that in recent times, like the SNIT deal, like this one, there's been a hue and cry, and then there is some reaction. Some have said it is because elections are close by. But this LI was late. It appeared initially that both the minority and the majority were in consonance on it. They were at Edem. Then all of a sudden, I mean, we heard from the likes of Roxanne Nelson, Dafia Mekpo, on that matter. We heard from other minority MPs. We also heard from Andy Apia Kubi as well, saying, we need this. Then all of a sudden, there was a pirouette and about turn by the minority. The speaker, interestingly, said he was not in the know. And that has left a lot of us scratching our heads like, what is your take on that LI, its relevance or otherwise, and the parliamentary process? And now the minority completely stepping aside and saying, we did not know about this. We were not in support of it, contrary to some of what we know. Dr. John Osai Kwapon.
It was a kind of an odd LI. I was not sure the problem that it was trying to cure or address. I mean, except for the fact that, yes, we all know that staying in traffic for long hours can be, irritating. I mean, we all go through the commuting hours of either the morning or the evening, and we all wish sometimes we don't have to stay in traffic. We all wish that traffic would flow seamlessly, etc., etc. But I just found it a little curious that as a result of those irritations, if that was the motivation for this LI, that there was the idea that we'll allow them to use sirens, go above the speed limit, etc., etc. As Professor Kwesi Prempeh said, apart from the president and the vice president, he struggles, and I share that opinion, to see why anybody else would want that privilege. I also feel like, as a result of the public commentary and the public disapproval of that idea, may have resulted in overall the LI being withdrawn or discontinued, but probably may also have informed some of the about 10 position that we witnessed. But it's also, for me, a good illustration of the fact that, yes, it may be an election year, but maybe one of the things that as citizens we need to do more of is, using our voices to disapprove of some of maybe the actions or ideas or thoughts that may emerge, whether it's from the executive or from Parliament. Yes, they may go ahead with certain things, even with a whole lot of public hue and cry, but I believe that there are also some occasions where they may listen. And hopefully, if we do a lot more of that from the citizens' end, that we may be able to get to a place someday where there is public sensitivity to the actions of our lawmakers, our policymakers, those who implement policies and programs on our behalf. If you look at the most recent Afrobarometer, for example, there's a perception that there's a question about, how often do you think members of parliament listen to what ordinary folks have to say? And the percentages are quite low. So there's this perception that our members of parliament do not listen very often to what ordinary people have to say. But hopefully, if we do a lot more of that and see some of these discontinuation of ideas, or even an LI that had made its way that far, that hopefully you can get a more or an improved parliament that is sensitive to public sentiment.
Sammy Obeng, are parliamentarians, and by extension broader leadership, the executive, legislature, judiciary, taking us for granted. And this is why. If you look at that communication from the Office of the President, dated the 19th of May, 2021, it is titled Abuse of the Use of Sirens by Ministers and Other Government Officials. It clarifies in there on LI 2180, Regulation 74, that the only ones allowed to use these sirens or bells are, reinforcing it, a government vehicle used by the head of state, a police vehicle, a motor vehicle used by the fire service, motor vehicle used as an ambulance or a hospital or clinic, and then a motor vehicle used by a recognized government security agencies, and bullion vehicles. Then it specifies that those not to use it, honorable ministers and deputy ministers, regional ministers and deputy regional ministers, MMDAs or MMDCEs, I should say, then CEOs of government agencies and officials of the presidency, unless otherwise designated. That was clear from that point. But then you also take a look at the disparities, because it has been pointed out that the bill, as was laid before Parliament, versus the bill submitted to the committee for assessment were different. If you look at 39, 40, Article 39 and 40, you would realize that there are some disparities, purportedly. What do you make of it from the first angle of whether our leaders are taking us for granted based on what the communication was in 2021 and these disparities and their usefulness or otherwise? Sammy Obeng.
Well, first of all, we've got to be active citizens. It is through being active citizens that we get some results, like the kinds of results that has been chalked in recent times. Because the reason why even checks and balances are embedded in the governance system for even the arms of government is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if you allow people the opportunity to...
Hello, Sammy Obeng.
If you allow people to go the way they want to go, the fact that we are human would usually lead us to, deciding on things in a particular manner that usually does not inure to the general
Sammy Obeng, I'm losing your sound. I'm losing your sound. Can we try again?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. I lost you for about 5 seconds. I lost you for about 5 seconds.
Okay. All right. So the point the further point I was making is that it's important to note that this came through as a result of a legislative instrument, LI, subsidiary legislation, rather than a bill. Now, one of the challenges that we have always had is the opacity of the subsidiary legislative systems that we have in our parliamentary practices, and of course, constitutionally providing. If it is a bill, what it means is that if the speaker refers it to the committee will have to engage with the public, expect public opinion and all of that. Public participation is very active. In the case of subsidiary legislations, LIs, Parliament can do all of these things because there is a mother bill and they're having a subsidiary legislation for that mother bill without consulting anybody. And we wouldn't have known some of these matters but for some level of vigilance. And the subsidiary legislative committee is not mandated, really, because of the nature of subsidiary legislation, to invite anybody, really, from the public or invite public opinion, because within 21 sitting days, if there are no objections from the committee and from Parliament at large, the subsidiary legislation is deemed to have been passed. And so we see so many instances of fantastic bills that have been passed to act in developing subsidiary legislation, standing on the back of some lacunas that may have been identified in those acts, and then making some far-reaching provisions that could be very harmful, particularly for this situation. Look, once I heard it, this was the very first thing that jumped at me. His Excellency the President, His Excellency the Vice President usually are driven by, professional security folks who are, as drivers who are trained for this and what have you. Members of Parliament are not provided drivers by Parliament or any other state security institution. In fact, a member of Parliament can drive himself or can hire his brother to drive him, or his wife can be driving him as his driver, and he gets to pay the person. Are we saying that if the honorable member of parliament is driving himself, or his wife is driving him, or whatever, his driver who may probably not have been, may probably not be as excellent a driver as anybody else, then will not have speed limits, then will not have, to observe the rules that we all have to observe on the roads? How dangerous can this be? Right? And so the opacity of legislative instruments, subsidiary legislations that comes to parliament, and the processes that does not allow for effective public participation is what is leading to things like this. And I think that all of us, from civil society to media to members of the public, must start zooming our lenses a lot on LIs when presented, on subsidiary legislation when presented to Parliament, just like we do on some of the bills that are of interest to us, because without which we would have had 275 risk-prone vehicles zooming across our streets, country, section to section, with no limits. You can imagine how dangerous that could be.